Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 198 for Monday, June 20th, 2022. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Jonny, but you may know him better as Muddy Pixel Riffs. Hello, sir.
Hello, been getting very muddy this week, and you'll notice our voices are sounding surprisingly clear despite that. That's really what we've been talking about on this week's Render Distance, how we use our voices, catching up with old friends, and the dangers of wearing your voice out when you talk for a living like we do. And if you're interested in hearing us talk more for a living, you can get the extended conversation, the Render Distance, by subscribing to us on Patreon over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. We also have upcoming Patreon-related events. We've got our monthly Minecraft Hangout that's going to be happening this Saturday, June 25th, around 11 a.m. Atlantic time. That is 3 p.m. local time for me, and adjust for your time zones accordingly. But it should be a good time, as these things often are, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has been doing in the Minecraft 1.19 universe, or if some people decided to delay updating until a bit later.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, my friend?
Well, as we alluded to, I have spent a lot of time with mud blocks. Really enjoying my time with mud blocks, actually, because I decided to start an automated factory for them. The design that I had in my head pretty much worked out when I built it in-game, and I've got a factory split into two halves. So one half just generates mud, and the other half does exactly the same thing, but it generates it onto a bed of blocks with pointed dripstone below them, so it will automatically start turning into clay as soon as it's produced. And if you put like a couple of mud blocks on pointed dripstone, it takes them a while. You go and check in on it every so often, and it's kind of like waiting for the phone to ring. It just never happens. But then if you put a large area of it, I think it stores probably 130 blocks, because it's like 13 is the piston push limit, right? And it's got 10 pistons in a row. So it will do that, and it will store 130 blocks. And by the time you've turned around from producing all of it, some of it has already started turning into clay. So it does actually act pretty fast if you put a large enough area of it together, just random ticks and stuff. So now I have renewable clay in my world, which is a joy. I plan on probably just putting that into an auto smelter and turning it all into terracotta, but that's very useful as someone whose nearest proper size Badlands biome is 7,000 blocks away. So I'm looking forward to that. But then mud, obviously, I've got packed mud on the go now. I started making a big manual wheat field so that I can harvest that every so often and make packed mud for mud bricks. And I've got the foundation, but not the outer shell of the factory built yet. Beyond that, I've basically been clearing up all of the little features that didn't really merit a full episode of the survival guide, but needed mentioning at some point or another. So I've been back to the ancient city to get more music disc fragments. I've crafted a recovery compass, for better or for worse. And I found out, actually, that the recovery compass doesn't track any deaths that you've taken before 1.19. Because presumably the wild update added the code that tracks the actual location of your death, whereas previously all the game had to remember was how many times you had died. So yeah, I discovered, having crafted a recovery compass, that it still spins and doesn't point to where I last died, which I know exactly where it was, so I would have been able to check. But yeah, I'm holding off on actually dying so that I can demonstrate that for real. But for now, people are just going to have to take my word for it.
Awesome. It's going to be interesting to see the recovery compass in action, as people in new worlds that don't have all the necessarily infrastructure set up that I do on the Citadel will be using the recovery compass. And I think too, introducing any players to Minecraft, like if you've got a world and you've got a family member that's playing Minecraft with you for the first time, introducing them to that concept is going to be super helpful. Because I remember getting turned around in Minecraft when I first started, and the we've talked about how the Java system of coordinates is not all that intuitive, and even sometimes getting flipped over in terms of like north, south, east, west and stuff like that in the game. I think that the recovery compass would be excellent for new players to know about and be able to use. Talking about renewable clay, I really was intrigued with your video about the clay factory, or the clay factory, because of the chain that you kind of outlined. I'm not going to remember all of it, I don't think, off the top of my head, but it was like stone to was it stone to cobble and then cobble to something else and then
If you start with cobblestone, smelt it to turn it into stone, then you can convert that into moss using bone meal, right?
Right.
Is this the thing you're talking
yeah,
about?
yeah.
So once you've got moss, you can turn that into rooted dirt by bone mealing an azalea on top of it. And the rooted dirt, along with coarse dirt and regular dirt, is what you can convert into mud. And so then if you bake the mud over, well, not bake it, you leave it out to dry effectively over the pointed dripstone, that turns into clay. You can bake the clay to get terracotta, dye it, and then glaze it to get glazed terracotta. And suddenly you've gone from stone on one end of this big long chain to glazed terracotta on the other end. And it's a really fascinating loop. There are a few other ways people have done that. I think they've converted large amounts of moss or dirt or something into podzol using large spruce trees, and then you shovel it or hoe it with you turn it into a dirt path or whatever, and then you put a block over the top of that, and then you turn that back into regular dirt. And there's a bunch of different transformations that you can effectively loop together, and it's how automatic you can make that in the process, which is a fascinating field of study at this point.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that, it would be very difficult to do en masse because you've got the problem of like, well, what do you do with the azalea tree once you've done it? Like once you've grown it, you have to move that rooted dirt block somewhere before you can turn it into mud and make it useful. Because you can't, the thing is like, you can't break the block and then get it into a water stream or anything else, because then you can't dispense blocks.
Yeah, you can't place it again. Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole thing has to be in like hopper chains and things like that. And I found it really, really interesting. Now, I mean, all the other things that you would need, like the water bottles and any kind of like bone meal, like all of that can be automated and moved around with like either hopper mine carts or dispensers, or like whatever you need. But I thought that was just really, really interesting. And especially for someone like you that has a Badlands that's super far away, or for someone that's in a world that just wants to experiment with these blocks and needs I need 6 of these glazed terracotta blocks to really make this purple build sing. And I cannot find a Badlands to save my life. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't need tons of them, you can just do all this manually. It'll take you 20 minutes, once you know what you're doing. Like if you have the other things like moss and bone meal, water bottles, so you're going to have some glass. But if you've got that kind of stuff around, then being able to take stone or cobblestone and turning it into glazed terracotta, that's cool. Like it's really, really interesting that exists in the game.
And then obviously you've got all the other stuff that you can do with stone and converting it into different types of blocks. You've got sculk as an offshoot of that as well. Like there's a bunch of stuff you can do. So honestly, I think knowing how to make a stone generator, maybe not just a cobblestone generator, but a natural stone generator, is such a useful skill, given some of the recent developments in like what you can automate. Because the possibilities are really expanding at this point. And we got an email about that later today. Actually, this is our Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, by the way. Should have kind of mentioned that at the top of the show. But we got some really interesting emails about how people are harnessing some of these mechanics and working on them, and what else could be used this way. Speaking of harnessing mechanics, the other thing I'm building up towards in the survival guide is repurposing the ancient city as a survival base. So I actually want to move into one of these things and spend a bit more time there. And so I went over on a stream, went back to the ancient city, and took out all but one of the shriekers. And I'm pretty sure I've got all of them, unless there are some, hiding underneath floors or around the corners that I haven't checked. But I've been through, scoured the entire city, got all of the loot and everything locked down. So I'm pretty sure that now I've been everywhere. I have one shrieker that's just roped off using wool, and there's nothing around it that can activate it. And so I'm kind of interested in turning that into effectively an area where we can observe the warden and make it a bit more of a study than just running away from it constantly. I think we can do some fun stuff with that. The only thing that's going to delay me doing that is that Empire's SMP Season 2 kicks off on Saturday, so I've been spending a little bit of time there as well, but no spoilers yet. I'll be able to talk about that next week.
Oh, great. That's cool because you've brought Empires up a couple of times on the podcast, and I keep on forgetting to ask you off mic. I was like, well, I can't ask him on mic if he's going to be on that season because I don't want to put him on the spot if he is or isn't or whatever. And that's cool. That's great that's coming back. I'm looking forward to that. I thought that the last season, I didn't watch everybody, but I thought that it was really interesting the way that you guys divided up. What was it, resources, or like people were essentially like RPing as like, I am the ruler of this particular resource on
yeah we
server,
basically
right?
we wanted to keep the number of automatic farms down relatively low, and the solution to that was, instead of everybody building their own iron farm, one person is in charge of iron, and you have to effectively go there and barter with that kingdom if you want to get hold of that resource.
Nice.
Which
Yeah.
had its ups and downs. Like, obviously, if people weren't around for videos, then you didn't want to just go in there and take the stuff. But, you know, we had behind-the-scenes agreements about a lot of that stuff, and I think this season we might end up having, like, a better way of interacting with that if somebody's going to be, like, on holiday for a couple of weeks or something.
Yeah.
So we'll see how
Yeah.
it all goes. But I'm just excited for the world that we've found. The seed is incredible. I can't wait for people to see it. It's
Cool.
one of the more spectacular Minecraft landscapes I've seen out of 118 World Generations. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
I do have some regrets with having such a long-term server and traveling into new areas and seeing the very obvious, even if it's subtle, changes to the terrain. I remember looking at this stuff when I was loading new chunks and looking for that mangrove swamp last week and seeing like something like a mega taiga that it wasn't on a mountain, but there was enough topographical changes. And I was like, this is definitely 118 stuff.
Mhm.
And it feels so much more interesting than the subtly rolling hills or weird blocky mountain or like kind of chunks of mountains that we
Yeah.
have in some of our other areas. And I think one of the things I'm going to do when I finish West Hill is like move on somewhere farther away and like get into some 118 areas, and just doesn't matter. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing, but like I want to do it in an area that's generated, you know, new.
Yeah.
Especially if I can find something really interesting like a Mushroom Island or something.
Oh
That's
yeah, no,
got
super fun.
118, you know, so then it could be mountainous, it could be not. What's underneath it, who knows? Like all that kind of stuff could be very, very cool.
Yeah. Speaking of West Hill, is the end in sight? Do you have an idea about when you're going to finish, or are you still kind of going through the motions with it?
Given that it took me like 2 streams to build a house and a half this weekend, I feel, I honestly, when people ask me, I think it's going to take me the rest of the year. I think it's going to take me the rest of the year. Because even when West Hill, the town, is finished, which is monstrous, I still have like, it's kind of plunked in the middle of this plains biome. Like I've done a little bit of landscaping around it, but not much. There's farms, and then there's this giant area where I had envisioned, quote unquote, more farms built by server mates. You know, server mates have not shown up. And I'm teasing because out of respect, they're like, well, it's kind of your area. I don't want to like encroach on it. So it's like, but it's so much work. Like, you know, so I might see if anybody wants to do, I like that idea that I've seen on Hermitcraft where you'll see hermits helping hermits on Mondays, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so if I have a giant field of like beets to plant, I might be like, can someone come help me with this? You know, like, you don't have to design anything, but like there's like 11,000 beets I have to plant right now. And it just takes a lot of time. But yeah, so I'm thinking the end of the year probably. If it happens sooner than that, great. I'm also anticipating that at some point during this process, probably when I'm done with this particular road on the west side of West Hill, I'll probably take a break. Like last summer, I took nearly 8 weeks and I built the moss farm and I built a geode farm. And a zombie copper farm. So that took, you know, several streams away, and it was a nice break from West Hill. So I might be taking this, you know, 118, 119 adventure sooner than later. I might want to, you know, branch out and do stuff. I mean, even when 119 came out last week, I took some time to go look for a Minecraft swamp, or a mangrove. Wow, words. We talked about this. Mangrove swamp in Minecraft. That's what I'm trying to say. And like that took a stream. Like half a stream one day and half a stream the next day was looking for a mangrove swamp. Mm-hmm. So I did gonna stretch my legs and get out of the town for a little bit. But this past weekend, I've been spending a lot of time with mud and mud brick as well. Not in the most successful way. I've found that it's been very difficult to work with. And I'll get more into that in an email later. But I got to the point with this, we'll call it adventure shop or a cartography shop. The only thing that kind of hints that it is that I'm telling you that it is, because I don't find that anything about the design says this is a place where explorers go. And I wanted to use the new blocks, and so I was kind of pushing myself to try that. And so the mud bricks and the packed mud are in the roof, and then everything else is kind of like standard blocks. The challenge that I'm facing most of the time is not that all the new blocks in 119 are hard to work with. It's that I'm finding it challenging to work them into West Hills specifically. So we're talking about a medieval build. It's a medieval build in a plains biome, and I've been mostly using stone brick and other brown wood blocks. So while it's nice to have another kind of brown hue with the mud bricks, and it has a different texture and stuff like that, I do find it challenging for it to meet my aesthetics for West Hill. I'm looking forward to using mud again in a different build, like in a desert or a jungle or like some other completely different function that I'm having to use it for right now. But I mean, it was successful to the point where like I can't spend any more time on this little house.
Yeah.
I kind of have to move on. So it looks good enough, but I didn't walk away going like that went exactly as I planned.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. I'm happy enough with it, which is something it's a lesson Minecraft has taught me over the last few years, is that as an artist, I have to be able to walk away. Otherwise, West Hill would never be finished. Like I'd be noodling at things forever. So what I try to do is I get something to a point and I say, okay, that was a decent try. It's not awful. But now the next time that I work with mud brick or packed mud, or I want to do something like this, I'm going to say, okay, well, one, the footprint has to be bigger. Two, I have to have, more of these blocks available, because I really got slowed down by having to stop, craft more mud blocks, and then go back to the building and all that kind of stuff. So it's not something that I have shulker boxes full. I've got maybe a half a shulker box of mud, but mud bricks are something I kind of have to make on the fly right now. So I haven't taken the time to just have tons of that. So it's hard to play when you're like dealing with 6 or 8 blocks in your inventory at a time and you're constantly running out. The other thing that I did was, across the street there was another build that I had started and not quite finished, and I took the time to do all the details on it. So like adding a very specifically windy chimney, adding a bunch of azalea and flowering azalea blocks on the outside, doing the interior. I don't really have a name for this. It's just a little house. It's just, there's no function to it in terms of speciality. It's just someplace where someone lives. And it's really tiny, and it was challenging to get a livable space with like a place to cook, a place to sleep, and a place to wash your hands, like all in one little area. I felt like it came out successfully. I had a lot of fun with trying some different color candles and trying to make sure that there were things in the windows, whether it's a candle or I put an allium in a flower pot, so that when you're in the main square and you're looking up at this house, you can actually see the flower in the window, which is nice. And another lovely nod to the new lighting, mechanics in the game, because I've got a trapdoor ceiling in parts, because it's such a low ceiling for the second floor. 3 candles are lighting up the entire home. It's all spawn proof because I've got 3 candles in the window, to the point where I wanted to add more, but I didn't have any place to put them because I wanted it to be a little bit brighter at nighttime. But there's a window on the alley. It looks really cute. And I really had a lot of fun. But like it took an entire stream to get all these details down, because I honestly think that smaller stuff like this is harder. It takes longer than going into something that's like a big library or a giant hall in the main keep. Like once you've designed a section, big builds tend to have patterns that repeat, right? Yeah. And I find that in a small build like this, there are really no patterns. You're just trying to squeeze stuff in, and it's a lot of trial and error, and you're breaking blocks to place them in the right order. And I do find that it was I don't want to say tedious, because I do enjoy it. I don't anticipate it ever to take as long as it does. You'd think I'd learn by now. But yeah, I really like it. And surprisingly, there's a sandstone accent wall and sandstone above some of the windows. I didn't think it was going to work, but I've got some stripped oak in the roof, and then light beige of the roof and the lighter beige of the sandstone actually work together. I was pretty impressed. It's small. It's like little stairs above the windows, and there's only like 6 blocks in the sandstone wall on the back, but it actually worked together. So I was pretty impressed.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. No, I definitely feel that when you're designing small interiors compared to big interiors, like in larger spaces, you can get away with putting in less detail because your brain kind of fills in the gaps a lot more easily. Whereas if you only put a couple of things in a small interior, it just looks empty. So it does get a little difficult when you're dealing with player scale houses like that. So yeah, I think it's neat, and it's obviously good that you've got the tables and chairs data pack, and you've got a couple of other bits and pieces.
Yeah, that helps.
Again,
Yeah.
sub-block details. We keep talking about them, but it's really what makes interiors like this feel a lot more alive.
And you can get to it without a data pack too. Like I have got a smoker instead of a fireplace, and the smoker just has a couple of walls on top of it that look like a stovepipe.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of goes out into the chimney. And so one of the challenges that I've kind of given myself, and it's part of my design aesthetic, is that the chimney actually connects. Like it goes up the wall, it goes outside, and then it makes a corner. So it's not like the smoker is in one place inside and the chimney is a completely different location outside just for looks. They actually connect. You have to kind of walk by it to go to bed upstairs, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, without the data pack, you can still do a lot with candles, flower pots. I like extinguished campfires quite a bit for logs next to a fire. I find that that's a really handy thing. And I've been doing a lot. I mean, there's a meme in my chat about like you built this city on spruce trapdoors.
Yeah.
Because like, man, do I use a lot of them, and they're just so versatile. Like I use them all the time to the point where I get mad at other trapdoors. They don't work as well. It's like,
yeah.
Dang it!
Why can't you be solid? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing with what was the one that I was complaining about this weekend? Oh, the warped wood trapdoor. It's like, well, the color's not bad. I wish it wasn't so twisty.
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of wanted to have straight lines. Like I wish it had like an acacia kind of like grid to it, you know? What do you say we jump into some news?
Yeah, let's do it.
We are looking at Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 22W24A, now heading towards 119.1, which will add the allay duplication and the ability to report chat and, of course, fix a few bugs. New features in 22W24A, added allay duplication and added player chat reporting. Allays will dance to a record playing in a jukebox. If the allay is handed an amethyst shard while dancing, it will duplicate. Duplication has a 2.5 minute cooldown. Player chat reporting is now possible to report a player for sending abusive messages in game chat. A reporter is required to select the individual chat messages that contain the objectable content, as well as the category of the report. This is to provide the best context for our moderation team to take action. Accessed via the social interaction screen or default keybind is P. The social interaction screen is now available via the pause screen in the multiplayer games. Multiple chat messages can be selected for reporting. The category of the chat report can be selected from a list of chat report categories. Additional comments can be entered to provide more details and information regarding the report. Fixed bugs in 22W24A. Trader llamas continue to spit at their target after it has died. So they're going to calm down now. Nitwit villagers can have a profession. Cured villagers can work at wrong workstations. Sky color is visible for a brief moment after applying night vision under the darkness effect. Frogs can lay spawns on flowing water. Frogs don't lay their spawn on waterlogged blocks. Loading server resource packs reloads twice when one is already loaded. Mobs that naturally spawn in with an environment will play the respective equipping noise, and cured villager trades are not refreshing. All of these things have been fixed.
And a few very minor bugs, so it seems like they caught most of it in the 119 full release, which, yeah, we were watching the bug fixing process, and it all seemed to be pretty straightforward, at least as far as Java is concerned. I know there are still some outlying Bedrock issues, but it's good to see that now Bedrock had the beta that included allay duplication. Those features are coming to Java as well. Have you found any allays yet, by the way? I presume not, if you've mostly been looking for mangrove stuff.
I haven't, but I haven't gone looking. I think we maybe checked out one pillager outpost on the route to look for a mangrove swamp, but my brain was mangrove. The chat had to turn me around to say, you should go look for an allay there. I was like, oh, right. But then I was like, well, even if I find one, I'm miles from home. Like, it's going to be really hard to get him back. So we went looking and we didn't see the cage. So we didn't really look that hard. I took out some frustrations and killed some illagers, but like, other than that, it was a pretty fruitless adventure.
Yeah.
I am glad that they added the duplication. I think that's going to be nice for players. It does feel a little bit tacked on to me, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, like, frogs, you have to mate them, and you have to grow the tadpoles up in a specific biome to get a specific kind of frog. And I feel like with all the other animals, you have to then breed them, and like you have like a random chance to get a certain thing. Sheep, you can breed different colors, and like one of the offspring will be either one of the colors of the parents, like that kind of stuff. I found that the allay duplication, just even using the term duplication, feels weird in terms of like that's the official. That's the like you're not breeding the allay. I kind of wonder like why it's not something just a tad more inventive. Like what happens if you get two allays in the same 3x3 area and give one a bit of sugar and they give the other one some gunpowder, and then poof, they kind of like there's an explosion and another allay appears, a third one. Like I don't know, like that's just kind of like an imaginary cartoonist way of thinking about it. But like giving an allay a shard and it just kind of duplicates feels strangely basic.
Yeah.
Even though it's not. Like, I mean, it's a strange feeling.
I think part of the problem is because you're giving them items the rest of the time so that they can go and pick them up, is like finding specific circumstances in which a mechanic like breeding makes any sense. But also the idea that these are more supernatural beings. They don't necessarily feel as organic. If you look at Vexes, I mean, evokers summon them for 60 seconds and then they start to, take suffocation damage and die again. So it's kind of like you don't necessarily assume that they would breed in the same way that cows and sheep and whatnot do. And so without it feeling like a voluntary process the way villagers do, having two allays and breeding them together feels kind of strange. It's also the case where, because you have to go out and find them in the wilderness for the first time, if you've only got one, if you're on a server, or like if you had two but then one of them dies or something like that, being stuck with just one mob isn't always all that fun. I think we've all had the frustrations of like, we brought a cow home but it's the only cow you could find and all of the other mobs around are sheep or whatever, right? Like I think it just gets around those kind of hiccups by introducing a mechanic where it doesn't need to be breeding based, so why would we make it that way? It feels more magical. The fact that the amethyst shard is tied into it, and amethysts are a kind of a musical thing, like that sort of like cements it for me as like, okay, I buy this. Like this is part of what really sells it. And the fact that they get to introduce the allays dancing, which I know a lot of people were disappointed that they didn't when they were added, because the allay dancing in the promo video looked really cute to them. So I think it's kind of cool that they can, backtrack a little bit and go back to what did people like about this? How can we tie in existing items so they feel a little bit more useful? And, how do we get multiplayer servers, especially, the ability to clone their allays if they need more of them?
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it's that. I wonder if it's the similarity to the allay function of giving them an item that makes them duplicate, and just the fact that they're using the word duplicate in the notes. And I don't know if there's anything that, like, outside of them telling you in the notes, like there's nothing in the game that would, I think, hint you in that direction. I don't think. Yeah,
I mean it's kind of one of those things, like if there's an advancement for it, that would probably signpost it a little bit better. And right now there's a couple of advancements involving allays. Both of them I think are secret, so like you only get them once you start interacting with the allay in very specific ways. And so there's a certain amount of it to which player experimentation can take you so far, but then to go the extra mile, you really have to look into what these things are capable of.
Yeah, because it has to be dancing while the record is in the jukebox and receive an amethyst shard. So like it's definitely a bit of a setup. Because you're not going to necessarily have a record right away either. Depending on, you might find an allay before you find a record, depending on what you've been doing in the game.
Absolutely. If you spawn near a pillager outpost, you've got allays from basically minute one. Yeah. So it's kind of fun. I think it's going to be interesting to see how people end up using that. And honestly, I think at the end of the day, regardless of how the mechanic functions, it's going to be a necessity for people who aren't able to get hold of them on multiplayer servers because somebody else has gone around and raided all of the mansions and the outposts already.
Be interesting to see if a spawn town full of people that have sorting systems with allays ends up with a frame rate of 4.
Oh yeah, no,
because
it's going to be
because-
it's going to be a lag fest. But I think that's also part of the reason for obscuring the mechanics slightly, is making sure that players who are playing more casually in single player worlds don't just like duplicate the magic fairy over and over again and end up with a ton of stuff pathfinding around their spawn area.
That would be a great name to call an allay. Just put Magic Fairy on a name tag and just stick it. Really literal. I was wondering also about the resource refreshing bug that they were talked about, things refreshing twice and taking a while. I've noticed, and this could be just me, that when I even just adjust the order of my resource packs, and I only have like 4 in there, it takes like 60 to 90 seconds to reload all of them. I'm wondering if that is reloading like each and every one of them, and that's why it's taking so long. Because previous to, I want to say 119, I found that a lot of the refresh stuff was faster, specifically using shaders. Now, big asterisks here. I'm using Fabric with the Minecraft default loader, but I'm using Fabric, and I do have a handful of mods, not a lot, and most of them are like client-side UI stuff, so nothing really, really heavy. But I have noticed that 119, even before I loaded Fabric on the machine, when I was just kind of loading up vanilla 119 for the first time, 119 in general, I find loads slower than before. I'm not sure if you've noticed that at all. And I wonder if some of that has to do with some of these like looping like texture bugs and stuff like that.
Maybe, I don't know. I think the shaders thing is more just Iris performing better than Optifine, or like being able to
That's
load
fair.
stuff
Yeah.
faster than Optifine. So I don't know if we can really lay that on the shoulders of the wild update, but yeah.
Oh
I don't
no,
know.
that's been faster, but I've just noticed like in general, like that Minecraft loading screen is up for a lot longer than it used to be.
Interesting. Can't say I've noticed that myself, but again, it's one of the things that I probably just tune out. It loads for however long it loads, and that's it, kind of thing. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on that this week and see if I can really make a judgment one way or the other. But either way, if it's being fixed as a bug in 119.1, then good. That's fine. So now we come to the thorny topic of moderation, and this is actually something I can speak to from experience because I did this for 4 years at Disney Interactive. I used to work for a team that was based in Brighton, a bunch of Disney employees who did online moderation for online games like Club Penguin, the kids' virtual world that shut down a few years ago, along with my job, actually, but I'm fine. I'm doing better. And so I know a bit about the process of moderating text reports sent in by players, chat reports, that kind of stuff. It's not all we did, but it was a significant portion of what we did. And first of all, for Minecraft, it's a big job. Like, I can see it being important for Minecraft's brand image to be a safe place for kids. Moderating reports for a game the size of Minecraft, especially something that Minecraft is played in so many different languages across the world, a monumental task. Like, we had a hard enough time keeping up with Club Penguin in English, and that didn't have nearly the player base that Minecraft does. So my first thought on this is this will almost certainly be either outsourced or at the very least done by a pretty dedicated team of Microsoft employees who already have similar responsibilities. Like whether this is the existing support team from Minecraft who have presumably been dealing with like, you know, chat violations and stuff that have been reported via the previous system, or, you know, if it's going to be a whole new workforce that they're hiring for this. I don't see this being something that happens side by side with game development. Like, I don't think it's all going to be located in the Stockholm office. For a start, it's going to be a round-the-clock thing anyway. But yeah, the second thing to point out about this, because there's a lot of misinterpretation about what these features are, this kind of moderation can only happen through text. You can't report someone for griefing. Because there is no way for Minecraft team moderators to pass that kind of information. You know, if TNT is used on a server, there's no amount of console logs or data reporting that Minecraft naturally produces that's going to prove TNT was used maliciously. Like, for all Minecraft's external moderation team knows, you know, you were TNTing your base intentionally because you wanted to blow it up and reclaim the resources, or you're using TNT in, like, you know, a demolition kind of thing to farm stone for you or whatever. Like, that kind of stuff, player actions are always going to be up to the server moderators. And server moderators, like people who are, part of that community and are playing on the same server as everybody else, are still going to exist, which is why I think the role of this moderation team is going to be just to act on anything that doesn't align with Minecraft's community guidelines. These are linked in the snapshot article for 22W24A, so if you're interested in reading those, then you can. And basically, you can sum it up as anything which could negatively affect Minecraft's reputation as a positive experience and a safe space for players of all ages to play. It's worth noting that all of the stuff in this could already get your Minecraft account banned if you did it. It's just that the reporting process was a little bit more arcane. It didn't happen from in-game. You would probably have to send in screenshots of a player behaving a certain way, and screenshots can be doctored, right? They can be edited. And so this is giving players an official way of doing this instead of relying on a system that doesn't really have a codified process for it yet. And so that really empowers the support team to make the right decision based on the evidence they are given, instead of just relying on, a player's anecdotal report of, oh, this person said this and this and this, which they might have just edited into a screenshot of their Minecraft play, right? And most notably, the community guidelines say these handy community standards cover gameplay using Mojang-provided online services, end quote. Which I take to mean they are specifically building in these reporting features for Realms, because it's a service that is owned and operated by Microsoft and the Minecraft team. This is not going to be something that is going to affect your private Anarchy server where you like to swear in the chat. And I don't know if it will only be for Realms. I imagine it will be possible to toggle it on and off for private servers, but this is like the signed and unsigned chat feature that was being developed basically as a lead up to this. It is something that you can switch on and off in your server's config files. If you know what you're looking for, and as a responsible server owner then you should be able to toggle this. For a start, I think the miscommunication here is that Mojang hasn't outlined this in a post on Minecraft.net. They haven't said, oh, by the way, you can switch these moderation features off, because it's an official release on Minecraft.net where they're talking about safety features which they take very seriously, and it's going to undermine the tone of all of that if they say to players, oh, by the way, there is a way to switch this off. Because immediately parents' alarms are going to get set up and be like, well, what if my kid switches off this moderation thing, not knowing what the process is and that it has to be a private server that they own and operate in order for you to do that. So I think a lot of people are getting worked up about this because they imagine that, some casual chat on their server is going to get them banned from their Minecraft account entirely. And in the majority of cases, I am certain that is not going to be the case. If they're doing their job right, this moderation team is always going to look at context. They use the word context in the article, and it makes perfect sense. If a player is yelling, kill him, in the chat, they could be talking about another player who they're bullying, or it could be about the Wither, right? Like, you don't know one way or the other. So they're going to look a lot at the context, and this is where players being able to highlight multiple lines of text to give context for why they're reporting somebody, that's going to make a whole lot more sense to a external moderation team than it is if you just get one line that says, oh, you're being mean, stop it, right? And on the other hand, if players in-game clearly start directing hate speech at another player, that's going to be a much clearer example. Over the course of discussing this with our Discord community, a couple of people have raised the important point that some words like racial slurs have been reclaimed by communities that they have been, and in many cases still are, used to debase. The N-word is the most obvious example, right? Black folks tend to use that colloquially with each other, but obviously anybody else using that is going to be a very bad thing. And that's where the context becomes very important, and that's where moderation teams like this are going to be trained to recognize that kind of stuff. Like, I can't impress enough how seriously teams who do this kind of moderation take their job, and how much deliberation and like outside input and double checking goes into something before action gets taken. It's not going to be an automated process. It's going to be human moderators doing a very human take on what's going on in a chat report. And if they are at all concerned about this, they have a bunch of different ways of getting in touch with people before they take any kind of action. So I honestly don't think if people are worried about this happening just to like some random person who logs onto their server, their public server, or if they, hack their way onto your whitelist and decide to report a bunch of people for nothing in particular, you're not going to get your Minecraft account banned. It's not going to work that way.
That's how I kind of look into this. Like my moderation experience, even though I am a moderator in a couple of Twitch chats, I'm not often that active, but I have moderators in my chat. And some things that I've talked about with moderators that are kind enough to volunteer their time is that, it's up to them and it's up to us to make the rules for, okay, well, it's not hate speech. It's not anything that's obviously breaking terms of service or anything obviously worth ejecting someone for. But they are breaking our rules, which are like, being rude or just being really derailing the conversation and stuff like that. And that's all subjective and contextual. And that's the kind of thing that the server moderators are going to be dealing with. I agree with you.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like
that
house rules, right? Like that's the whole point.
Yeah, I think the big swings, like you said, are going to come with like any kind of like obvious rule breaking or investigating for bullying, like that. That's the kind of thing. And after having several conversations with friends in the last week that have children and just talking about online stuff, and because I'm into Minecraft, I sometimes get questions about like safety and things like that. And like I dealt with bullying, like being bullied as a kid, but like the internet wasn't barely around. Like I can't even imagine what it's like to like try to go to your safe space online in Minecraft and deal with bullying, and the language being used is not breaking any Minecraft or Mojang Microsoft community guidelines in terms of the hard rules. They're still just using normal language, but maybe they're just being condescending, or like that kind of stuff is going to have to be more on the server moderation side, because I can't see the official team having the time to deal with all of that, because that has to be around all the time.
There's millions of people playing Minecraft on a daily basis. You think they have time to moderate all of the chat that goes on those multiplayer servers? No, absolutely not. And also, I think the main thing here is that it's got to be tied into Realms, because Realms is a service through which, I mean, for a start, again, owned and operated by Minecraft, people pay out for Realms subscriptions, and it's also something that you can invite somebody else to through Java Minecraft if you know their username. You can send invites to people. I receive invites just because my username is public and people know vaguely who I am. And obviously I decline all of them because I'm not just going to go and play on some random person's realm. But the fact is, people are doing that. And that is potentially something that bad actors can exploit, right? Like you end up with people who potentially end up joining people's Minecraft servers in order to get in touch with underage kids. You don't want that kind of stuff happening. And so if kids are made to feel uncomfortable in a public space owned and operated by Mojang, they need some way of letting the team know something bad is happening. And yeah, ultimately, it's a way of putting that agency into the player's hands, where previously the process of reporting another player for behavior like that would have been very difficult for a younger player to get their head around, because it involves opening a support ticket with the Mojang team. And that all sounds very official compared to an in-game reporting feature that they can just hit a couple of buttons and it's there. I don't think the average player, adult or otherwise, has too much to worry about from this. But obviously we'll see it develop as we go on. I'm not going to say my final word on it quite yet, but they are open to feedback, as the article says. Like, they're looking for feedback on this feature, and reports that are generated whilst the feature is still in progress may not be, counted as violations. If people are just testing some stuff out, then by all means give this feature a look and form your own opinion about it. But that's just my 2 cents as somebody who used to do this professionally.
I've got one question before we move on, and I want to lean on your experience in this kind of stuff previously, and it's okay if you're not sure about it. But I had a question about things like reclaimed words, and we'll use the N-word as an easy example again. And I'm wondering like where things like just the simple fact that rules are rules would apply, because like, people can curse and swear in regular language and feel free to do so. But if the server says, look, we're family friendly, don't swear, then that's not the place to do it. And I'm wondering in certain situations, like in communities that, yes, they have a reclaimed word or phrase, but even though that is accepted within the community, would they still use it in church? So if a rule says, yes, it's lovely that that word has been reclaimed by you and your community, but you still can't use it here because it's just easier for us to have that rule. Is that something that you've run into at all, or do you think and do you think that might be something that could be applied in this situation? Just kind of keep it cleaner, and cleaner in terms of a cleaner way of moderating is a better way to say that.
I think it's just going to be down to people understanding what kind of community they're joining when they log into somebody else's Minecraft server, right? And I feel like communication is always the key in all aspects of this. Like, if you feel like the server you're joining might have some rules that you don't know about, ask somebody, and that will give you like a baseline understanding of what your behavior is supposed to be like. And then if you violate that behavior in some way, then that's something that people are going to have to look into, whether it's the server moderators are going to have a word with you, or maybe somebody doesn't feel comfortable with that, reports you. And to be honest, if your account is getting banned, it's going to be for something pretty egregious. It's not going to be just for the average word getting thrown out here and there. I expect if it gets banned for something like that, it would be a temporary ban, and then maybe you'd receive a caution. You'd have the opportunity to appeal. There is an appeals process for community guideline strikes already, which is, again, available from the Minecraft community guidelines page on their website. It's all about communication. It's all about making sure you understand the rules of a space before you step into it.
Agreed. Moving on into some email this week. Do you want to jump in and grab the first one?
Yes, absolutely. This is our Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, so we're going to be reading a few of them here. If you would like to email the show and have your email read on a future Chunk Mail Dispenser or any of our regular week-to-week episodes, you can email us at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The first email comes in from Kagan W, and the subject is, Packed Mud Makes Me Sad. Hi, Pix and Joel. I wanted to use packed mud in deserts as soon as Minecraft 1.19 came out, only to find that it doesn't look how I thought it would. I imagined it would be perfect for Adobe-style builds. Terracotta doesn't work in my opinion, and the crafting recipe for packed mud is a nod to how Adobe is made in real life. However, it's a little bit too dark. The texture is perfect, and I don't know how to alter texture packs. It's really disappointing. Do either of you struggle with this kind of thing when you're building? Kagan.
I'm going to put a link to the Adobe style of building, just a Wikipedia article, just so people are kind of aware of what's going on. But it's essentially clay and hay kind of put together, mud and hay put together in the same way that you build the blocks in Minecraft, just so that the context is there. I get the frustration when a block that should go with other blocks similar to it in hue or tone doesn't work the way that you anticipated, because maybe it's too busy. Maybe the contrast is too high. Maybe the direction of the texture is the opposite of, direction of the way that you want it to go, and you can't change it because it's not a directional block. I've been struggling with mud bricks as well. They have a really cool, warm, orangey, almost pink texture. I said that incorrectly. They have a really nice, warm, orangey, pink texture on the bricks, but with a cool, more purpley mortar. So as a result, when you put them next to a warm block, the purple kind of doesn't go. And when you put them next to a cool block, the purple goes, but then the warm doesn't go with the cool block. So I find it difficult to try to find something that they go very well with. They contrast well with some other blocks. Like when you put them with a blue or a purple, they look cool. They look great. If you put them with some darker browns, like deep, like stripped dark oak, again, high contrast, so it works very, very well. But when you put them next to some other things that you think they would go with, they don't, and it becomes tricky. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's tones in the texture that don't necessarily mesh well with what I'm looking for. Usually it's color temperature that I'm trying to sort out. The good news is that, like, if you want to change the texture, hue or contrast of a texture without editing it, like, you don't need to be an artist to go in and do pixel edit and draw stuff. If you just want to change something to be brighter or darker or more red or more blue, then there's a lot of free tools out there like GIMP or paint.net where you can just load up the texture from the texture file, Java specifically, and just change a slider in the same way that you would adjust a photo on Instagram. Like you want it to be more blue, or you want to highlight, like raise the highlights. Like those kind of sliders in these tools are really easy to use. And once you know which direction you want to go with it, it's not difficult to make that change. It helps if you have a handful of blocks in mind that you want it to work with. One of the things that I can use as an example, because I tend not to change vanilla blocks immediately when I don't like them. Like I really don't like Blackstone, and I've not built with it because I find it very purple and weird. Deep Slate for me is something I use a lot more often, but I've not gone and made Blackstone something else entirely because I'm trying to adhere to the challenge, which is part of the game, I think, of trying to use the blocks in a way that they work together. And sometimes they'll add new blocks to the game and it'll be like, oh, finally, I have something that'll go with Blackstone, or I have something that will go with sand or whatever. Sometimes that doesn't work out. But one thing that I know that I've changed in the past that has worked out well for me, I really didn't like the wheat texture or the hay bale texture. It was something that just did not look like what it was supposed to look like as far as what it was called. And I find that it did not go with anything else that you think that wheat would go with in the game. So I changed it. But I mean, like, I have the advantage there of being an artist, and that kind of stuff can come quite naturally to me and not take me very long. So there's that. But in terms of like just dropping something in and saying like this block is too bright or this block is too saturated, I just want to desaturate it by like 10%. That kind of stuff is quite easy in some free tools that are available out there.
Yeah. I think Fwip recently put out a video about how he made his resource pack, and so that might go into some of the technical side of like where to find these files and how to save stuff to the right directory, or how to create a separate resource pack of your own, which I know is the kind of thing where people start editing stuff in the Minecraft directory on your PC, and then you're like, oh gosh, what if I'm like dramatically changing something about the game and it's not going to run anymore, you know? So if you're at all concerned about that process, then there are some great tutorials out there for the technical side of how a resource pack is made. Following tutorials, honestly, my number one recommend in answer to this question. It's also worth seeing if there are other folks out there who are like-minded and also don't like the packed mud texture, because I mean the texture you said wasn't the problem, the hue of it or whatever was the problem, but like there are plenty of resource pack creators who, like Joel, alter things like hay bales, or some people go for glazed terracotta because they know they're not going to use it, and they mess around with a few alternate textures for that will suit their purposes better, stuff that fits their style better. And maybe somebody out there has a mud texture that you'll like a lot better, in which case you could maybe just crib it from their resource pack, and as long as you don't share it around as its own distributed download, you're probably going to be fine just for personal use. One thing I will say is make sure to search for 16x16 textures if you want to integrate it with the default resource pack, but there might be some people out there who have tinkered with mud a bit already and found that it ended up closer to the Adobe that you and they know.
Next email comes in from Superior, a yellow allay theory. Hey, Jonny and Joel, I heard in episode 197 you mentioned the yellow allay in Minecraft Legends trailer. I was thinking, what if those are vexes before they turned evil? You discussed how allays and vexes were possibly related, and I think this could be Mojang hinting at that relationship. Maybe at the end of Minecraft Legends, the nether mobs cast a curse on the overworld and divide all the mobs against the player. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Superior was killed by a Vex because he kept missing it with his sword. I have felt that pain.
Yeah,
I have felt that pain.
Absolutely,
I have felt that pain. It's like I found that fighting an allay, or not an allay, fighting a Vex for my first time in Minecraft was very much like the fly that you can't seem to catch. Mm-hmm. And also, oh, by the way, the fly hits like a truck. Like,
yeah, the fly is also equipped with knives.
Yeah, yeah.
It's rough. The first thing I thought of when I saw that yellow allay was those key mobs from Minecraft Dungeons, and I was like, why do they fly now? And then I was like, oh, okay, it's flying alongside a blue allay too. It just looks like a flying version of one of the keys. It's got the glow and everything, but it's like exactly the same color yellow, I think.
Actually took me a minute to realize that they don't fly. You carry them around, the keys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
and most of the time they just like lie back down and fall asleep once you're done with them. It's kind of cute.
Yeah, they make some weird noises too, and a similar kind of like singing or tonal noise to an allay, right?
Yeah.
They kind of, it has a ring to it, right?
The allays have more of like a glisten to them, but yeah, no, it's kind of similar, and I like that. they're obviously taking effectively like inanimate objects like that and turning them into mobs. It's an approach that we don't get in mob design super often, because those things tend to be like golems, right? They tend to be snow golems, and obviously like the more utility mobs like the Vexes or the allays rather. I can't believe we're both getting them confused now. It's funny how similar they are, but they tend to look a little bit more boxy, and even though they are humanoid in a sense, it's a different scale that really gives them the character that they have.
Oh, and I think too, there's a different design aesthetic just in terms of how long it's been. Like Minecraft designs, and mob designs from back when the Vex was introduced versus, what we get now with like the frog, right? Like think about, the sheep versus the frog. Like they both feel Minecrafty, but one feels dated compared to the other.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I feel like, when you look at a Vex and an allay, the Vex is in the game and it's part of Minecraft, but the allay feels more modern. It just feels like a more modern aesthetic in terms of character design. You can do the same thing with Disney cartoons. Like you look at a Disney cartoon designed in the 60s and versus something designed in the 90s. It's a completely different aesthetic.
Yeah.
Still looks like Disney, but it has a very different kind of like more bubbly, smoother appeal, whereas a lot of the characters in the 60s were more extreme, like either really skinny and gangly or like they'd be really round and robust, whereas the characters would be more subtle, I think in say like, Little Mermaid or something like that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a really interesting idea. I like that Minecraft Legends is kind of presented as, an assumed prequel sort of idea, a possible prequel or a possibility of prequels as far as the lore goes in the game. So it's allowing players to kind of think like, oh, well, maybe this is what happened. And kind of like that might inspire some Minecraft builds. Like what if you designed a world for the yellow allay? It's the abandoned yellow allay forest or something like that. There's all kinds of really cool things that you could do. I like the idea too of like maybe the yellow allay and the blue allay were brothers or friends or somehow related, and the yellow allay chose a different path of darkness and mayhem or something to become the Vex. Like you don't know whether they were corrupted, whether they chose to become evil. They just got fed up with the blue allay taking stuff and moving it everywhere, and they just like, look, I line this stuff up on purpose, you keep on moving it, and they just decided like this involves knives now. I do wonder sometimes if Mojang is prepared for the onslaught of why isn't this, or we want this in vanilla Minecraft that comes with a new property like Minecraft Legends.
Yeah, I fully expect there's going to be yellow allay people lining up around the block after a certain point. From the limited gameplay that we've seen in the trailer, there's a moment at about 1 minute 40 into the trailer where it shows a very small piece of gameplay. A lot of it is more cinematic, but it seems like the allays in Minecraft Legends are actually there to gather and build for you. And it seems like the blue allays are removing blocks and the yellow ones are placing blocks. And I'm not sure if it's even different allays or if it's the same creature and it's just turning a different color based on whatever its purpose is at the time. Because there seem to be two of them constantly, either building stuff for you or taking down blocks for you so you don't have to get off your horse. Because obviously, if you slow down the pace of gameplay for resource gathering to what core Minecraft does, it's going to be like a long process to collect enough resources that you can build anything just by yourself. So the allays seem to be helpers in that respect. And so I'm not certain if the yellow and blue allays are even necessarily distinct mobs, but if they are, then there is potential for it to be something where the one type of allay turns bad at the end of the game and turns out to be the villain or something. Then again, I don't expect this to be the game that tells that story necessarily, mostly because the ones that we know with working with the Vexes, for the most part, are illagers, and the main villains of this game are piglins. So I get the sense that that's not the relationship they're building to. And it would also be kind of weird for this game about uniting the overworld to end with the overworld's hostile mobs turning against the player. That would kind of feel like an anti-victory rather than like a satisfying note to end the game on. Interesting though it would be. It feels like a very like a twist ending that I'm not sure they would go for in a game that's targeting this sort of demographic.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I'm thinking about like, there's no illagers in the trailer that I saw that I remember.
Yeah.
those same logic might have to be applied to the villagers. Like if you're giving the villagers weapons and saying, "Hey, come help me defeat these piglins," and then at the end, half the villagers go like, "Well, we don't want to give the crossbow back to you now, so we're gonna keep it."
I do love the idea of arming the villagers, and then one of the villagers just kind of like looking at an axe that it's got and being like, I can use this," and then turning into a vindicator for the remainder of his days. Yeah, it's an interesting theory, and I am really interested to see how the lore of Minecraft Legends interacts with anything vanilla Minecraft at all. But there's some cool stuff lined up. It seems like it's going to be a very interesting game. Not certain that's going to be the origin story for Vexes, but we will see. Stranger things have happened. The next email comes in from Cosmic Quilfer, and the subject is, what if Skulk Catalysts made renewable sand? Well, you've got my attention. Hi, Pix and Joel. I've been thinking about the new update recently, and the way that Skulk is renewable with Skulk Catalysts and sand. The Skulk Catalyst converts the blocks around it into Skulk when it receives XP as fuel. What if Skulk Catalysts, if crafted with that sand, could turn other blocks into sand instead of Skulk? Echo Shards could maybe be a part of the crafting recipe to provide more functionality to Echo Shards. Do you think this idea is too overpowered, or do you think that it has the proper time and effort put in versus reward out ratio? Thanks so much for providing an amazing podcast. Cosmic Quilfer fell from a great height and caused a lot of dirt to be made into sand because of his 20 levels. That's something I haven't tried yet. I haven't tried dying near a Skulk Catalyst and seeing how many Skulk blocks it makes. But the player can hold a lot of XP, so yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I never thought about that. Like if you have a way of getting really fast XP and get yourself up into like 200-300 levels, then I wonder what happens.
I do wonder though, because the player only ever drops 7 levels worth of XP, right? I think you drop a maximum of 100 XP, which is enough to get you up to like halfway through level 7, which is why when you go back after a death, you can only get back up to level 7 and you don't get your 100 or so levels back. So I wonder if maybe that's the cap for player deaths around Skulk. Still quite a lot though. That's still like, I think 4 times as much as a pretty decent, like a Piglin Brute or an Enderman or something is going to drop.
Yeah, get all your server mates together, make sacrifices. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's an option. I can see some servers tending that way, yeah.
Yeah, that would be really funny. I mean, I find it odd that sand is one of the few blocks in the game that is used for so much that is not yet renewable. Like, we have cobblestone generators, and you can get stone anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got entire biomes full of basalt, and we can generate basalt too. So sand, especially with deserts being more rare from my observation in 118 Caves and Cliffs Part 2, making renewable sand, I feel, is a step that I think would be very welcome by players. And I feel like there might be the knock-on effect of, like, you know, that divisive discussion about TNT duping. One of the reasons that people dupe TNT is because sand isn't renewable, because gunpowder is. And I think that, on top of the fact that you have to craft all the TNT, but even I think that I would be more inclined to do crazy cool TNT projects if sand and gunpowder, well, gunpowder already is renewable, but if sand became renewable, I'd be willing to put in the work to do, like, you know, not necessarily on like a Doc M level, but like I'd like to do one of those flying machines that blows the crap out of the world just for fun, to say that I did it, to learn how to do it. And I would be okay with crafting all of that TNT by hand if the sand was something I didn't have to also mine by hand. I find that's tricky because I've got other things I want to do with my sand too. Like I want to build, like I want to do concrete. I want to do, you know, I need glass, that kind of stuff. So I feel like, you know, automation and crafting in sand is a cool idea. I feel like for me, it should be more along like the educational or natural way of how it would happen in the real world. Via either grinding stuff down into sand with some new function in the game, or just the ability of changing glass into sand. Like, I mean, I recently read an article online about a business in the US that is turning all kinds of old bottles, instead of recycling them, there's a shortage of sand. So rather than going to dig up sand off of beaches or natural places that occurs in the world, this company is making sand from discarded bottles. So rather than those bottles going to trash or a heavy recycling program or landfills, they're smashing them and crushing them down into sand that's then used in like sandbags and like the kind of things that we use sand for industrially, right?
Yeah.
And I like that idea. I mean, you've got glass bottles from witch farms. Like if you could start to smash those into, I mean, take a look at like something like a glowstone dust. And if you take 9 glowstone dust or a similar thing, but it's a sand item, and then that makes a block of sand. If you crushed a bottle and it gave you crushed glass, and then you could turn that into sand, then like that would be viable. It would be a process, but it would be viable.
Yeah. No, I agree that it should feel a bit more like a natural process or something that we can do in the real world. Like, I think if it starts to follow along the same mechanics as stuff like Skulk and Moss, creative though this idea sounds on paper, I think if you introduce that, it starts to become the zombie variant problem, where everything has the same basic mechanics with maybe just like a small twist of like how you get it started to add flavor, but then spreading sand the same way Moss spreads, the same way Skulk spreads, it just kind of ends up being the same set of mechanics repackaged in a different form. And I think the main question really is, does that feel intuitive for sand? To have it packaged up with the Skulk stuff, I kind of don't think so. I think Skulk being able to make sand also, for a start, has weird lore implications about where the rest of the sand in the Minecraft world comes from. But also, has the kind of potential to feel a little bit repetitive in terms of the mechanical stuff. Like, I agree it should feel like a natural process. The problem with that, on the other hand, is that a lot of the sand that we find in the world's oceans is created by the tides. And Minecraft water is incredibly static, to the point where I'm surprised that there are sandy beaches in the Minecraft world to begin with, because there is no swell of the ocean push and pull happening. You know, like all of the water is just a flat mill pond, and it's, you know, it naturally makes sense to us that you will find sand on the coastlines of the Minecraft world, because that's where we find it in real life, and it's Minecraft imitating reality in that sense. But I'm still kind of confused about how it got there from a natural perspective. So, yeah, I don't know what the solution for sand really is, and I expect Mojang doesn't either, or at least they're probably workshopping some ideas, but I don't know if they've settled on the right one yet. Otherwise, it might be in the game already, because sand has been in the game for as long as anybody can remember.
I'm trying to think about the modded versions of this kind of thing that I've seen, and the two that come to mind are in my all of Fabric 5 playthrough. One of the tech mods had like a grinder, and you had to power it somehow. So in Minecraft, vanilla Minecraft, it would look like probably a furnace or coal powered machine that you would put stone in, and sand or gravel would come out the other side, or it would go in steps, like stone to gravel, gravel to sand, or however you want to do it.
Yeah.
That would be one way. The other way that I've seen that makes sense too is, I want to call it a sieve. I've seen it in like Skyblock mods, where you have to take dirt and sieve it or filter it down
you force
into
it through a mesh, and it turns into something else.
And it turns into like, oh, this is like gravel and this other thing, and then you have to take gravel and do it again, and then that gets you smaller and smaller particulates as you go, kind of like panning for gold, like that kind of idea. And that seems like a viable way. It's manual though. Like, unless it's automated, I don't think players are going to be. I mean, as much as we want renewable sand, if you have to sit there and do it by hand, like, you might as well go mine it. Right.
Yeah.
So like there's certain parts about that I find are interesting, but I'm not sure how you would do it. But I feel like there's probably a fun Minecraft way of doing it. Like, I could even see like a certain block, like, I guess blowing it up with TNT would be a bad example, because then you're using sand to make sand. But I feel like there's there'd be a fun way to make sand that could be maybe not at how sand is made in the real world, but then also have a fun little Minecraft twist on it. Because, like, granted, stone and rock and water coming together, or lava and water coming together making stone, that makes sense. That's what happens in real life. But like, mining it immediately and having it be an infinite source of water and an infinite source of rock or of lava is also kind of weird. So there's room, there's wiggle room. Like, when you talked about waves and stuff like that, I thought, I wonder if there's a way that the player could have water flowing over certain blocks, and after a certain amount of time, that last block or something like that would turn into sand, and then you could like push it away with a piston, push another block in its place and wait for it to turn into to sand again. Slow, but automatic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get the sense that you'd need that to be a really specific block, though, because
Yeah.
otherwise, if you have like anything like stone or grass or whatever, that's the stuff that I'm just pouring water on whenever. Like, it generates that way as part of natural terrain when a water source forms in a mountainside, and then
Yeah.
you're just going to have weird pockets of sand popping up everywhere. So again, it's such a hard thing to nail down. And I like the Skulk idea because it's a tactile mechanic. I think that's the cool thing about Skulk as well. It doesn't involve another machine with a GUI and all of this other stuff hooked up to Redstone to produce it.
Right.
You can do some of that stuff later if you want to start spawning in mobs and, maybe breaking some of the Skulk or pushing it around or whatever, but you can do a lot of that stuff just by killing a mob nearby and watching the magic happen. So I think if it's something like sand, I don't think a grinder or something like that you've seen in the Sky Factory playthroughs that I've done, I use the same thing. I think for vanilla Minecraft, it needs to feel like a more tactile process than that.
What if it's a mob? Like,
I mean,
we've got the idea of, like, what if it's a sand golem? Like, instead of a copper golem, like, what if you give dirt or rock or something or granite, like a block you don't always use all that much, to a sand golem, and it basically like eats it, and
Sure.
and becomes your friend, and then poops out sand.
I'm on board.
Like,
I've floated the idea of having Dune-style giant sandworms that just drop like a ton of sand on, like, form a new sand dune in your desert when you kill them. Like, even stuff like that. I like ideas like that because they feel more creative and more immersive in the world itself rather than just being another inventory for us to access. But then it just becomes, how do we automate that to make it more approachable as a mechanic to players who want to do that kind of stuff? It's tricky. The debate continues.
In Minecraft, the sand must flow.
Hopefully it will.
Last email comes in from Gundar H. Stryker, a landscape artist member of our community. Old features and new tricks. Hey, Jonny and Joel. I've been taking it slow with Minecraft 1.19, trying to incorporate the new blocks into a build before I go looking for other parts of the update. I finally started working with frogs quite a bit, and I decided I wanted to farm frog lights for some custom swamp trees. I remembered that magma cube spawners do indeed exist, and I went straight to find a bastion and set up a farm. Previously, magma cube spawners were fairly obsolete from my experience, or minimally used, as their drops were already able to be crafted via more useful combinations of farms, slime farms, and blaze farms. This made me think about how there are other features that aren't used as much at the moment, but may find a new and important purpose in the future. Think goats or phantoms, for example. I would love to hear your thoughts on a quote-unquote forgotten feature that has been renewed or you hope will receive a renewed purpose. Ribbit. Gundar H. Stryker.
I love the short and sweet sign-offs are some of the best. Awesome. I think goats are almost starting to get renewed purpose in the sense that we now have the goat horn, which was one of the things we were considering goats were going to have in the first place, and they figured out how they want to implement them for now. So goats are goating there, if you will, and I don't know if phantoms are ever going to be useful. I think their use right now is to harass players into sleeping, which, you can decide for yourself whether you find that a functional mechanic or not. But even they have the function of being able to brew slow-falling potions. So there are very few useless features, but I do agree that there are some features that it's nice to see come back around with renewed purpose. My favorite example of this is when bees were added and suddenly campfires, which already had a ton of uses as a lighting block, as a free way to cook 4 pieces of food at a time and so forth, became infinitely more useful. and the campfires have kind of gone from strength to strength, from update to update. They smoke beehives so that you can harvest them manually. They have soul campfire variants that deal double the damage and are really useful in mob farms because mobs can fall on them and take damage, and it's a non-solid block, so all of the drops go through. There's a lot of good stuff to be said for campfires, and I long for the day when some features end up seeing the amount of love that campfires have gotten.
The first thing that came to my mind was not quite what Gundar H. Stryker was talking about, but waterlogging leaf blocks. That's a new function in 1.19. And it's giving us more decorative building options, being able to place leaf blocks either partially submerged or submerged. to make your vines going into water look cool, or man-made vines, I guess I should say. It allows players to grow trees or build custom trees entirely underwater. So if you wanted to make like an underwater SpongeBob village with trees, you totally could do it. And because the water source is contained within the leaves and does not flow out everywhere, like say a waterlogged trapdoor or a slab, you can use it in redstone contraptions for automation and different things. I think you tried that in your mud factory. Was it?
Yes. Yeah. I
Was it a
was
leaf
trying
block?
to. I was trying to fill up the water bottles that I needed to turn the dirt into mud. I was trying to fill them from a water source contained within a mangrove root block, which I think are the whole reason we have waterlogged leaves in Java now to begin with. They were a thing on Bedrock Edition already, and unfortunately they don't contain the water on Bedrock Edition from what I understand. So we'll see if there's a parity change on the way for one direction or the other. But I think the fact that they have the ability to contain water like that is really useful. And yeah, I found that collision was a problem. So when it would spit out a water bottle, and the idea was that it would get picked up by a hopper underneath the leaf block, it turned out that sometimes they would pop out to the side quicker than the hopper could pick them up. Could have done it with a hopper minecart maybe, but the hopper was unfortunately not fast enough to grab some of the water bottles before they were spat out the side. But I think being able to waterlog leaves is a really cool addition, and I've already found a couple of really neat uses for it, along with it just being an aesthetic thing.
Something else that I was talking about on stream this weekend that just popped in my mind just now is what it would be like to apply the function of something like a sea pickle to how flowers work in the game. So we've all been there where you want to place a fern or a flower on this block and have it look pretty in the front of your build. And the way that the default game places it is way in the corner, and it's half hidden in whatever you've got next to this block. But then some other random block you choose and the flower is right in the middle. And I think that it would be nice to have more control as the player. I'm not saying that the world generation has to be any different. Make the world gen however you want. But if you as a player have a flower in your hand, I feel like you should be able to place it in the middle of the block. Or if you want to add more flowers to that block, just like when you bone meal a sea pickle underwater and it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, candles do the same thing. The function is already there. The mechanics are already there in the game. Players would be familiar with it. Not only would you have more control over having 1, 2, 3, or 4 flowers in an area in terms of like 1 being in the center or 2 or more being a more full looking block. I do find sometimes that I opt for things like ferns or grass or leaf blocks because they fill the space better than a single flower that might float on the side of a block, at which point like the block might as well be empty. It doesn't look like it's got anything in it. And I feel like that could be an interesting way to really amp up the flowers with a very simple mechanic change. I imagine you'd see them used a lot more if that was the case.
Yeah, we're running a resource pack that Fwip made on Empires, which we had last season as well, where he's got more variation in the flowers, and so some of them have 2 or 3 or 4 flowers all coming from the same like little patch of them. It's more like a bundle of flowers rather than it being just one sat in one corner of a block, and I think that adds a lot of life, a lot of variety to the world, which isn't normally present there. It's the kind of thing I tend to overlook in Minecraft, but as an aesthetic change, it does add a lot.
The other thing that I came up with was the opposite of what Gundar H. Strucker was getting at, and that is that moss farms now being an excellent source of bone meal almost immediately in the game. As soon as you can find moss, you've got unlimited bone meal at your fingertips. And unless you need the XP or the bow drops, then finding a skeleton spawner is far less exciting now. Right? Like,
Yeah.
Really, when you find a skeleton spawner in early game previous to moss being in the game, that was your bone meal. Like, that's my farming, that's my food taken care of. Like, amazing. Yeah. Plus, I get XP. But now it's just like, why do I want to bother with, granted, a good bone meal source that I can't move? Whereas you could put a little bone meal moss farm like in your backyard. As soon as you've got moss, you've got the ability to make a very efficient bone meal farm. And so in a way, that's done the opposite, and it's kind of removed the excitement and the functionality out of finding a skeleton spawner. Again, unless you're looking for XP and bow drops.
Yeah, I agree. I think I still look for skeleton spawners. I still yeah, if I want to get hold of a skeleton spawner, it's usually in the early game like that. But I often find that most of my bones just come from a general mob farm anyway. So there's
Right.
there's arguments to be made, but I do like having a passive way of getting a hold of it. It's obviously better for peaceful players as well. And yeah, like the skeleton spawners aren't going to be that useful for peaceful players anyway, though. I agree, though. It's interesting to find how some of those older features are getting made obsolete, and I do wonder if there is a way that life can be breathed back into them in future. I've seen people also suggest that now we have powder snow, you can use that to farm strays from a skeleton spawner, and my response is always, why? Because they drop slowness arrows, but that's the only real difference. And as an infinity bow user primarily, I don't tend to worry about tipped arrows because they run out, which is not what I want arrows to do with my personal choice of bow. And tipped arrows are one of those things that I would like more stuff for in a way, or like more reasons to use them. If there were specific mobs that like had a lot more weaknesses to stuff like tipped arrows, like I get that if you shoot a zombie with a healing 2 arrow, it's going to do more damage, but I don't see people specializing in healing 2 arrows the way they specialize in having a smite sword, for example. So I'm kind of curious to see if anything else like that has mileage. I would also love to see something else for lingering potions to do on a related note, or Dragon's Breath, because Dragon's Breath is just used to brew lingering potions, which, aside from tipped arrow crafting, can't really do anything that a splash potion doesn't do. I don't think the lingering effect cloud lasts for long enough, and there's potential there for something to be expanded a little bit, but it sort of felt like one of those features that was tacked on to the 1.9 update. There's a ton of stuff, really, in Minecraft that has either fallen out of vogue with players, and that's just a natural thing based on how old a feature is and how useful we find it day to day, but also don't really feel like their functionality was ever super necessary. Like the clock is my favorite example of this. I feel like the clock deserves more love. It's a nice looking sprite. It feels good to own, to have crafted, or to have found a clock. I have one in a bundle in Empires now that I'm just kind of carrying around, and I can just mouse over my bundle. It's not taking up any more inventory space than it would otherwise, and it's just there to show me the time. But I don't need to know the time most of the time. I look up at the sky, and if I'm in the nether or the end where I can't tell the time from the sky, the time doesn't matter in either of those dimensions anyway. So I'm kind of, I'm torn about the clock. I do think it could use some kind of revitalization. It could be in a crafting recipe for something else that might be useful to us. I don't know. But I do think there are lots of little things like that which would deserve some renewed purpose at some point in future.
You're going to have to help me out with the timeline here, but I just thought of another thing that was probably a revamp, which was, did fireworks come before Elytra or vice versa?
Oh, yeah, no, fireworks were around in terms of the decorative side of things long before.
Yeah.
But then firework boosting didn't come to Elytra until 1.11.1, I think. It was like one of those rare 0.1 updates that adds stuff significant to gameplay, like allay duplication does. Yeah, so I think fireworks did get a new lease of life, but only a couple of updates after Elytra were added. Well, if you folks at home have any examples of that stuff, that anything that you feel like there could be new life breathed into by a forthcoming update, then do let us know. Write in, and you might get your email featured on a future Chunk Mail Dispenser. For now, that's going to be where we wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. Thank you so much for listening. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community, where pledging at any level will get you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can participate in the live show recording, as we record the show in a Discord call every week, and you can tune in to our monthly Minecraft audio hangout, which is going to be happening once again this Saturday, so stay tuned in the announcements channel for the full details of that. We're currently at 342 patrons, which is up 1 from last week. There's always room for more, of course, and special thanks go out to our content engineers, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, and Yitz for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on Twitter and Instagram. Personal recommendations are by far the best way to share the podcast. Just poke a friend in the arm from a safe distance and tell them that they should listen on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, really wherever you can find a podcast. You can email us at the Spawn Chunk email address, which is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. You can listen to the Render Distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where I try to make sense of this bizarre and wonderful game in Season 2 of the Minecraft Survival Guide, and pretty soon, Season 2 of Empire's SMP as well. I stream 3 days a week on Twitch, doing behind-the-scenes work for the aforementioned YouTube series, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft Recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I am doing online, including illustration and design portfolio stuff, is at joelduggan.com. The Citadel Cafe is my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I had a great podcast with Brockett this past week talking about all the coming releases this summer and whether or not we're going to watch them in a game that he likes to call Pass or Play. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Minecraft at least 3 days a week. And coming up this week, you can look for a bonus Lego stream.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, which might be difficult to moderate.